The alarm in my head went off before the teacher even opened her mouth. Something was wrong with the air in the room. I could feel it through my antennae, a static hum that meant a new presence had entered our world, and nothing about that presence matched anything I had felt before. My name is Zeph. I study at the Celestial Concord Academy, a school built for the brightest young minds from 100 different worlds. We come from places where the ground does not shake, where the water does not bite, where the sky has never once tried to kill anyone. We are soft in the way that only truly safe creatures can be soft, and we are proud of it, because softness means our world solved their problems a long time ago. That morning, Instructor Vale walked into the room with a look on her face that I had never seen her wear. She was nervous. Instructors at the Concord Academy do not get nervous. They have seen every species, every custom, every strange food and stranger accent. But that day, her hands trembled slightly as she opened the door and called in the new student. A girl walked through the doorway. She was small, quiet, and completely ordinary to look at. 2 arms, 2 legs, dark hair pulled back, eyes that scanned the room once and then settled on nothing at all, as if she had already decided none of us were a threat, and moved on. She wore the plain gray uniform we all wore, and she carried her bag the way anyone would carry a bag. Instructor Vale introduced her simply. This is Lena. She has transferred from a world called Earth. The room went silent in the way a room goes silent when everyone recognizes a word but does not quite understand its weight. Earth. We had all heard of it in passing, mentioned in hushed tones during our history lessons, always followed by a warning label. Hazard class. Extreme. A world so dangerous that most species avoid even sending probes near it. A world where the very ground fights back against anything that tries to live on it. I looked at Lena again. She did not look like a warning label. She looked like a girl who wanted to disappear into the back row and never be noticed again. Taz, the small blue creature who sat beside me and who never had a thought he didn't say out loud, leaned over and whispered that she looked harmless. I agreed with him. We were both about to be very wrong, though it would take some time before either of us understood exactly how wrong. Lena took the only open seat, near the window, and sat down without a sound. She did not look around at the other students staring at her. She did not seem to notice the way 3 different species were now quietly discussing her in their own private channels, wondering what kind of creature could survive on a world that was supposed to kill everything that touched it. Class began, and for a while, nothing strange happened at all. Lena answered a question about orbital mechanics correctly, in a voice so quiet the instructor had to ask her to repeat it. She wrote her notes by hand instead of using a projection like the rest of us. When Taz asked her, in his usual too loud way, whether it was true that Earth had animals that could eat a person whole, she gave a small smile and said only that some of them tried. I remember thinking that answer was strange, not because it was frightening, but because of how calmly she said it. The rest of us, if faced with the idea of being eaten, would have needed a full session with the school counselor. Lena said it the way someone might mention that it sometimes rained where they were from. The morning went on, ordinary in every visible way, until the accident happened. The Academy's main hall sits inside a structure held up by old gravity stabilizers, ancient machines that keep the artificial weight of the room steady and even. They almost never fail. In the entire history of the school, there had been perhaps 3 recorded malfunctions, and each one had been minor. That day became the 4th. I heard the sound before I understood what it meant, a deep groan from somewhere above the ceiling panels, followed by a flicker in the lights. Then the gravity in one corner of the room simply vanished for half a second, and everything that was not bolted down floated upward before crashing back toward the floor with twice the force it should have had. A support beam, thick and heavy, broke free from a damaged section of ceiling directly above where a small furred student named Elowin was sitting, frozen, looking up at it with wide eyes and no time to move. I could not move either. None of us could. We are not built for sudden danger. Our bodies freeze first and think second, a habit shaped by generations of living somewhere nothing ever attacked us. Lena moved before the beam had even fully separated from the ceiling. I did not see her stand up. One moment she was in her seat, and the next she was already across the room, faster than anything I had ever seen a person move, her body low and controlled, in a way that looked practiced rather than panicked. She caught the beam with both arms raised above her head, absorbing the impact by bending her knees and letting the force travel down through her body instead of straight into her spine. The beam should have crushed her. Instead, she held it there, steady, for exactly as long as it took Elowin to scramble out from underneath, and then she set it down gently on the floor as if it weighed nothing at all. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Lena straightened up, brushed a bit of dust off her sleeve, and looked around at all of us staring at her. Something flickered across her face, something that looked almost like regret, as if she had done something wrong by simply catching a beam that would have hurt someone. She said only one thing: "Sorry, that was close." Then she walked back to her seat and sat down, picked up her pen, and continued writing notes as if nothing at all had happened. Instructor Vale stood frozen near the front of the room, her mouth slightly open, clearly trying to find words for what she had just watched. Maintenance drones arrived a few minutes later to clear away the beam and check the stabilizers, and the class slowly returned to something resembling normal. But nothing about that room felt normal anymore. Not to me, and I suspected not to anyone else either. Taz leaned over to me, his voice much quieter than before. "Did you see that? Did you actually see that?" I told him I had. He asked how someone so small could do something like that. I did not have an answer for him. For the rest of the day, I found myself watching Lena without meaning to. She ate lunch alone in the courtyard, a simple meal from her tray, chewing slowly, her eyes moving across the open space in small, careful sweeps, checking each direction, though there was nothing to check for. No predator has ever set foot inside the academy grounds. There was nothing here that could hurt her, and yet her body kept scanning anyway. The way a machine keeps running even after the danger it was built for has long since gone away. During our afternoon session on interspecies history, the class was asked to share one fact about their home planet. Students spoke about floating cities, about oceans made of liquid crystal, about festivals that lasted for entire seasons. When it was Lena's turn, she paused for a moment, glanced down at her hands, and said simply that her planet had a lot of weather. The instructor, trying to draw her out gently, asked what she meant by that. Lena said that sometimes the sky turned dark and threw ice at you, and sometimes the ground opened up without warning, and sometimes the water rose high enough to take entire towns with it. She said all of this in the same soft, steady voice she used for everything, no drama in her words at all, as if she were describing something as ordinary as rainfall. The room had gone quiet again, the same way it had gone quiet after the beam. A few students exchanged glances. I noticed Elowin, still shaken from the morning, staring at Lena with something between fear and awe. Class ended not long after that, and as we filed out into the hallway, I heard two students from the row behind me whispering. One of them, a tall reptilian boy named Draven Cole, said something under his breath that I was not meant to hear, but my hearing has always been sharp. He said that Earth people were probably not as tough as they pretended to be. He said the beam thing was probably a trick, some kind of enhancement device hidden under her sleeve. He said someone should test her for real, see what she could actually do without machines helping her. I did not think much of it at the time. Draven often said things simply because he liked the sound of his own voice, and he had a habit of underestimating anyone who did not immediately impress him with strength or size. Lena was neither large nor loud, and in his mind, that made her an easy target for doubt. I walked home that evening thinking about the way she had moved, the calm in her eyes even as she held up something that should have crushed her, the sadness in her voice when she apologized for saving a life. Something about her did not fit the picture the rest of us had of a Deathworld survivor. I had expected, if I had expected anything at all, someone loud and aggressive, someone who wanted us to know how tough they were. Instead, I had met a girl who seemed to be trying very hard to be as small and quiet as possible, as if being noticed at all was the last thing she wanted. I did not know it yet, but that quietness was not shyness. It was restraint. It was the careful, constant effort of someone holding back an enormous amount of strength, trying desperately not to let it show, trying to be normal in a place where normal had never included anything like her. I would understand that fully soon enough. But that first day, all I understood was this. The classroom had welcomed a new student, expecting someone ordinary. It had no idea what had actually walked through that door. The days that followed felt like watching two different people trying to live inside the same body. There was the Lena, who sat quietly in the back of every class, who answered questions in a soft voice, who never raised her hand unless called on, who seemed to want nothing more than to blend into the walls of the academy and be forgotten. And then there were the small moments, scattered throughout each day, when the other Lena showed herself, just for a second, before disappearing again. I began to notice these moments because I could not stop watching for them. Something about that first day, about the beam and the calm in her eyes, had planted a question in my mind that would not leave me alone. What exactly was hiding underneath all that quiet? The first real clue came during a cooking exercise in our life skills class. Taz, who is clumsy in the most enthusiastic way possible, sliced his finger while cutting a piece of fruit. It was nothing serious, barely a mark, but Taz screamed as if he had lost the whole hand. Half the class gathered around him in a panic. Someone ran to call the medical drone. Another student fainted simply from the sight of a few drops of blue blood on the table. Lena did not panic. She walked over, calm as still water, took Taz's hand, pressed a napkin against the cut, and told him in a steady voice that he would be fine, that it was only a small cut, that it would stop on its own in a minute. She held his hand until the bleeding slowed, and by the time the medical drone arrived, there was almost nothing left to treat. Taz, embarrassed but grateful, asked her how she stayed so calm. Lena shrugged and said that back home, a cut like that would not even be worth mentioning. I asked her later, quietly, what would be worth mentioning where she came from. She looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether I actually wanted to know the answer, and then she said something that stayed with me for a long time. She said that on Earth, you learned quickly which injuries you could walk away from, and which ones you could not, because there was rarely anyone close enough to help you figure that out in time. I did not fully understand what she meant, not yet, but I understood that it was not something she said to sound impressive. She said it the way someone recites a fact they wish were not true. Over the next several days, I started paying closer attention to the smaller things about her, the habits that the rest of us never noticed because we had no reason to look for them. She always sat with her back to a wall, never in the middle of a room, never with her back exposed to an open space. She always knew where the exits were, and she seemed to check them without meaning to every time she entered a new room, her eyes flicking briefly toward the doors before settling anywhere else. She flinched, just slightly, whenever a sound was too sudden or too loud, though she recovered so quickly that most people never even noticed it happened. At night, in the dormitory wing where the human students were housed alone, since Earth had sent very few students to the academy and none of them shared her particular history, I sometimes saw her light on long after everyone else had gone to sleep. I asked her once why she stayed up so late. She said she had trouble sleeping in rooms that were too quiet. That struck me as strange. Most of us found quiet rooms comforting. For Lena, quiet apparently meant something else. It meant nothing was warning her of danger, and after a lifetime of needing those warnings, silence itself had become uncomfortable. I began to understand, slowly, that everything about her that seemed unusual to us was not unusual to her at all. It was simply how she had learned to survive, and she had brought those habits with her the way anyone brings home with them, even when home is somewhere none of us would ever want to go. One afternoon, during a free period, I found her sitting alone near the edge of the training field, watching a group of students practice a low-intensity sparring exercise under the supervision of an instructor. The sport was mostly ceremonial, more about balance and coordination than anything resembling real combat, since almost none of the species at the academy had ever needed to develop actual fighting skills. Our world simply did not require it. I sat down beside her, not too close, and asked if she wanted to talk. She said she did not mind the company, which for her, I was beginning to learn, was as close to an invitation as I was likely to get. We watched the students practice for a while in silence. Then, without looking at me, she said something I had not expected. She said that watching them made her nervous, though she could not fully explain why. I asked what she meant. She said that on Earth, when people moved the way these students were moving, it usually meant something serious was about to happen. Slow circling, raised guards, careful footwork. Her body reacted to the sight of it the same way it would react to a real threat, even though she knew, logically, that nothing here could hurt anyone. I asked her if that feeling ever went away. She was quiet for a long moment before answering. She said she did not know. She said she had only been away from Earth for a little while, and some habits had taken her entire life to build. She said she hoped, eventually, that she could learn to feel safe the way the rest of us clearly did, without even trying. That conversation changed something in how I saw her. Before that day, I had mostly been curious, even a little fascinated, the way anyone might be fascinated by something rare and unfamiliar. After that conversation, I found myself caring about her in a different way. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted this place, which had never hurt any of us, to finally be a place that did not hurt her either. Not everyone shared that feeling. Draven Cole had not let go of his suspicion from that first day. He was a member of a species called the Corvith, tall and armored, descended from a long line of warriors who had once fought real battles before their world settled into peace many generations ago. The Corvith still trained in combat as a cultural tradition, more sport than necessity now, but Draven took it seriously in a way most of his classmates did not. He was proud of his strength, proud of his size, and used to being the most physically capable student in any room. He had decided, somewhere in the days since the beam incident, that Lena's display of strength had been some kind of trick, and the idea that a small, quiet human girl might genuinely be stronger than him bothered him more than he wanted to admit. I noticed him watching her during meals, during class, during any moment when her guard seemed to drop even slightly. He made comments to his friends, never loud enough for a teacher to hear, always framed as jokes, always aimed at making the people around him laugh at her expense. He called her the Ice Planet Girl, though Earth was not made of ice, simply because he thought it made her sound less impressive. He suggested more than once that someone should test her properly, in a real match, without any of the theatrics of catching a falling beam. I told him once, quietly, that he should leave her alone. He laughed and told me that he was not doing anything wrong, that he was simply curious, the same as everyone else. He said if she really was as tough as the rumors claimed, she should have no problem proving it. I did not like the sound of that, but I did not know how to stop it either. Draven had a way of getting what he wanted eventually, through patience and persistence if nothing else. And I had a growing feeling that this particular situation was not going to resolve itself quietly. There were other signs too, small pieces of a larger picture that I was only beginning to assemble. During a night class on planetary ecosystems, the instructor showed images of various dangerous environments across the galaxy, meant to illustrate extreme survival conditions. When an image of a dense, tangled forest appeared on the screen, ordinary looking by most standards, Lena's hand tightened slightly on the edge of her desk. I was the only one close enough to notice. I asked her afterward if something about the image had bothered her. She said it reminded her of a forest near where she grew up, a place her family had warned her never to enter alone. I asked what was in it. She said it did not matter anymore, since she was not there, but her tone told me it mattered quite a lot, even from this distance. Another time, during a discussion about family traditions, several students spoke proudly about celebrations and gatherings on their home worlds. When it was Lena's turn, she mentioned a small ceremony her family held each year, a quiet dinner to mark the anniversary of a difficult time, though she did not explain what that difficult time had been. She said only that not every family member who started that tradition was still alive to continue it. The room, once again, fell silent in that particular way it always did around her, the silence of people realizing they had wandered close to something much larger and heavier than they had expected. I began to understand that Lena was not simply from a dangerous planet. She had lived through things that the rest of us, safe and sheltered our entire lives, could barely imagine, and she carried all of it quietly, tucked away behind soft answers and careful silences, doing everything she could to avoid burdening anyone else with the weight of it. I admired her for that. Even as it worried me, it seemed exhausting, holding so much inside while trying so hard to appear ordinary. The tension with Draven continued to build over the following days. He began finding small ways to provoke her, standing too close during group exercises, making comments about how humans must be exaggerating their own toughness for attention, once even bumping into her hard enough in the hallway that she nearly dropped her books, though he apologized in a tone that made it clear he was not sorry at all. Lena never reacted the way he seemed to want her to. She stayed calm, apologized when she had done nothing wrong simply to avoid conflict, and moved on each time without complaint. I began to realize that this too was a habit, not weakness but a strategy. She was avoiding confrontation, deliberately, the way someone avoids stepping too close to the edge of something they know is dangerous. I asked her once why she let Draven get away with treating her that way. She looked at me for a long moment, and something passed behind her eyes that I had not seen before, something older and more tired than a girl her age should have carried. She said that where she came from, she had learned a hard lesson. She said that fighting, even when you win, always costs you something. It costs energy, it costs peace, and sometimes it costs more than you are willing to pay. She said she had come to this academy hoping to finally live somewhere that fighting was not necessary, and she did not want to be the one who proved that hope wrong. I told her that Draven was not going to stop on his own. She admitted that she suspected the same thing, but said she would rather absorb his comments for as long as she could than risk the alternative. Neither of us knew yet how soon that choice would be taken out of her hands. It happened on a bright afternoon during our scheduled physical education period, the kind of ordinary day that gives no warning at all about what it is about to become. The instructor announced a friendly sparring exercise, a chance for students to practice basic movement and coordination under safe, controlled conditions. Pairs were selected, mostly at random, though I would later wonder whether Draven had arranged things so that his own name ended up beside Lena's on the list. When the pairings were announced and her name was called alongside his, I saw something tighten in her shoulders, the smallest flicker of tension breaking through her careful calm. Draven smiled in a way that made my stomach twist. He said, loud enough for the whole class to hear, that he was looking forward to finally seeing what an Earth girl could really do. I did not know it then, but the quiet, careful version of Lena that I had come to know over the past several days was about to disappear completely, and something far older, far more capable, and far more dangerous was about to take her place. The training field had never felt so quiet. Usually, during our physical education period, the air was full of chatter, the sound of students laughing, instructors calling out gentle corrections, the soft thud of padded mats being set into place. That afternoon, as Draven, Cole, and Lena stepped onto the marked circle at the center of the field, none of us made a sound at all. I stood near the front of the crowd that had gathered around the edge of the circle, close enough to see the expression on Lena's face. She did not look excited. She did not look nervous in the way the rest of us would have been nervous. She looked more than anything like someone bracing themselves for something they had hoped never to do again. Instructor Vale stood between them, reminding both students of the rules in her calm, practiced voice. This was a controlled exercise, she said. Contact should be light. The goal was balance and technique, not victory. Any student who felt the exercise had become unsafe could stop at any time, and the instructor would step in immediately if needed. Draven nodded along, though I noticed he was not really listening. His eyes were fixed on Lena, sizing her up the way he always did, confident in the easy advantage his size and training seemed to give him. Lena listened carefully to every word the instructor said. She nodded once, quietly, and took her position across from him. The instructor raised a hand, then dropped it, signaling the start of the match. For the first several seconds, nothing happened. Both students simply circled each other, the way we had all been taught, hands raised in the loose, ceremonial guard positions used in every beginner exercise across the academy. Draven moved with the confident swagger of someone who had never once doubted the outcome of a match like this. Lena moved differently. Her steps were smaller, quieter, her weight balanced in a way that looked almost lazy, until you noticed how quickly she could shift it. Draven made the first move, a slow, controlled advance meant to test her reaction, nothing aggressive, exactly the kind of light contact the instructor had asked for. Lena stepped back just enough to avoid it, smooth and unhurried, and returned to her position as if nothing had happened at all. A few students in the crowd murmured, clearly expecting more. Draven's jaw tightened slightly. He tried again, a little faster this time, still within the bounds of the exercise, but with more intention behind it. Lena avoided that one too, this time turning slightly to the side, letting his motion pass harmlessly by her shoulder. I could see the frustration building in Draven's expression. He was not used to being avoided so easily, especially not by someone half his size. He glanced toward the crowd, perhaps looking for the reaction he had expected, the laughter, the awe at his obvious skill. Instead, he found only silence, and a growing sense among the students that something about this match did not look like a beginner exercise at all. He pushed harder after that, his movements losing some of their careful control, the light contact rule bending further with each attempt. Lena continued to avoid him, calm and precise, never once attempting to strike back, simply staying just out of reach each time, as if she were dancing rather than sparring. I noticed something in her eyes during this stretch of the match, something that had not been there before. It was not fear, it was focus, the kind of sharp, total focus that comes only from long practice, from repetition drilled so deeply into a person that thinking about it becomes unnecessary. Her body was reacting on its own, calculating distance and timing far faster than conscious thought could manage. Draven, growing visibly frustrated by his inability to land even a light touch, abandoned the last of his restraint. He lunged forward, faster and with far more force than the exercise called for, clearly intending to finally prove his point in front of the watching class. What happened next took less than 2 seconds, though it felt, to everyone watching, like it stretched on much longer. Lena moved, not away this time, but toward him, closing the distance rather than avoiding it, her body dropping low and shifting sideways in one smooth motion. She caught his extended arm, redirected the force of his own charge using nothing more than momentum and angle, and in the same motion guided him gently but firmly down to the mat, controlling his fall so that he landed safely, though completely off balance and clearly startled. The entire exchange looked less like a fight and more like water flowing around a rock, effortless, almost gentle, and yet absolutely final. Draven lay on the mat for a moment, blinking up at the sky, too surprised to move. The crowd around the circle had gone utterly silent. I do not think a single one of us had blinked during those 2 seconds. Lena stepped back immediately, her hands raised, palms open, the universal sign of someone showing they meant no further harm. Her breathing had barely changed. Whatever had just happened had cost her almost nothing. Draven pushed himself up slowly, his pride clearly more injured than his body. For a moment, I thought the match might simply end there, an embarrassing but harmless lesson learned. I was wrong. Something shifted in Draven's expression, anger replacing surprise, his desire to prove himself now mixed with genuine frustration at having been so easily handled in front of the entire class. He got to his feet and came at her again, and this time, there was no pretense of a controlled exercise left in his movements at all. Instructor Vale called out immediately for the match to stop, her voice sharp with sudden concern, but Draven was already moving too fast, too committed, to hear her in time. I watched Lena's face change in that instant. The careful restraint she had shown throughout the entire match, the deliberate softness in every one of her movements, vanished completely. What replaced it was something I can only describe as pure, absolute readiness. A version of her that had clearly been waiting quietly beneath the surface this entire time, allowed out only now that real danger, however small it truly was, had finally arrived. She did not strike him. I want to be clear about that, because in the following days, rumors would spread through the school, exaggerating what happened, each version wilder than the last. She did not strike him even once. What she did was far more precise, and far more telling of exactly what kind of person she truly was. As Draven closed the distance, she stepped inside his reach rather than away from it, a move that seemed to defy every instinct the rest of us would have followed. She caught both of his arms near the wrists, used his own forward momentum against him again, and in one fluid motion that seemed to take no visible effort at all, brought him completely off his feet and set him down on the mat a second time, this time pinning his position with careful, controlled pressure that left him entirely unable to move, though completely unharmed. The whole thing took perhaps a single second. It was so fast, so clean, that several students later admitted they were not entirely sure what they had actually seen, only that Draven, easily the strongest student in our year, had been rendered completely helpless by someone he had spent days mocking for being too small to matter. The silence that followed was different from every silence before it. It was heavier, filled with a kind of collective realization spreading slowly across the crowd. This was not luck. This was not a trick device hidden under a sleeve, as Draven himself had once suggested. This was skill, deep and practiced, the kind that could only come from a lifetime of genuine necessity. Instructor Vale rushed forward, calling for the match to end immediately, and Lena released Draven the very instant the instructor's voice reached her, stepping back and away from him with the same open hands she had shown before, no hesitation at all in letting go. Draven sat up slowly on the mat, his armored plating scuffed but otherwise unharmed, his expression a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like fear, an emotion I had genuinely never seen on his face before that moment. The instructor knelt beside him briefly, checking that he was truly unhurt, before turning to address the class in a firm voice, reminding everyone that this was exactly why sparring exercises had strict rules, and that things could have gone very differently had either student not shown restraint. I looked at Lena as the instructor spoke. She was not looking at Draven, and she was not looking at the crowd either. She was staring down at her own hands, her expression filled with something that looked disturbingly close to horror. I understood, in that moment, that whatever had just happened had frightened her far more than it had frightened any of us watching. We had seen something impressive, even a little intimidating. She had felt something reawaken inside herself that she had clearly been hoping to leave behind entirely, buried under weeks of careful quiet and gentle restraint. The crowd slowly began to disperse as the instructor dismissed the class early, murmurs of disbelief following students back toward the main building. I stayed behind, along with Taz, who for once in his life had absolutely nothing to say. Draven picked himself up eventually, refusing help from anyone, and walked off the field without a single word, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. I did not know it yet, but that walk would mark the beginning of a much longer, quieter change in him, one that would take days to fully reveal itself. I approached Lena carefully, the way you might approach someone standing near the edge of something high. She did not look up right away. When she finally did, her eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen yet. She said, very quietly, that she was sorry. She said she had tried so hard to hold back, to keep everything small and controlled, the way the instructor had asked, and that for one single second, that control had slipped, and everyone had seen exactly what she truly was. I told her that nothing terrible had actually happened. Draven was unharmed. No rule had truly been broken beyond what he himself had started. She shook her head slowly and said that was not the point. She said that back home, a slip like that, even a small one, could mean someone did not walk away at all. She said she had come here hoping to finally be somewhere that kind of care was not necessary anymore, somewhere she could let her guard down without consequence. And now, she said quietly, everyone in that crowd had seen exactly why she could never truly do that, no matter how far from Earth she traveled. I did not have the right words for her in that moment, not yet. All I could do was stay beside her as the field emptied out around us, the last few students glancing back over their shoulders as they left, no longer looking at her with curiosity or doubt, but with something new entirely, a mixture of caution and quiet, uncertain respect. Something had changed in that classroom that day, something far larger than a single sparring match, and though none of us fully understood it yet, the version of Lena that the academy had welcomed as a quiet, unassuming new student was gone, replaced permanently by the truth that had always been standing quietly behind her, waiting for the moment it would finally be seen. The evening after the sparring match, I found Lena sitting alone on a low stone wall at the edge of the academy gardens, far from the dormitory buildings, far from anyone who might want to ask her questions she was clearly not ready to answer. I almost turned back when I saw her there. She looked like someone who wanted to be left completely alone, but something told me that being alone was not actually what she needed, even if it was what she thought she wanted, so I walked over anyway and sat down a respectful distance away, close enough to talk, far enough that she could tell me to leave without it feeling difficult. She did not tell me to leave. We sat in silence for a while, watching the twin moons rise slowly over the garden wall. Eventually, without me asking anything at all, she began to speak. She told me that Earth was classified as a death world, a term used across the galaxy for planets considered too dangerous for most species to survive on without heavy protection. She explained that the classification was not about cruelty or anger built into the planet itself, but about instability. Earth's weather could shift from calm to violent within hours. Its oceans held creatures capable of ending a life in seconds. Its forests, its mountains, even its smallest insects carried dangers that most other worlds simply did not have to think about. She said that humans were not naturally suited to any of this. No claws, no natural armor, no venom, no wings to escape danger from above. What humans had instead, she said, was adaptability and a willingness to prepare for danger long before it arrived, because waiting until the danger was already there usually meant it was too late to do anything about it. I asked her what her own life on Earth had actually looked like, the details behind the vague, careful stories she had shared in class. She was quiet for a long moment before answering. She told me she had grown up in a region where the land itself was unpredictable, prone to sudden storms and shifting ground, far from the safer, more developed areas that other Earth children might have known. Her family had taught her from a very young age how to recognize danger before it fully arrived, how to move quickly and quietly, how to protect the people around her when protection was needed, because there was often no one else close enough to help in time. She said this without any drama in her voice, the same calm, steady tone she used for everything, but I could hear, underneath the calm, just how much effort it took her to keep that steadiness in place. I asked her if she had always known she was different from the people around her here at the academy. She said she had known from the very first day, the moment she stepped off the transport and felt just how safe the air itself seemed to be, how quiet, how utterly free of any sense of watching or waiting. She said it had felt almost unreal, like a dream she was afraid to trust completely. She told me that she had come to the academy specifically because it promised something Earth never could, a place where survival was not something you had to think about every single moment of every single day. She said she had hoped, more than anything, to finally learn what it felt like to simply exist without needing to prepare constantly for the next disaster. And then, she said quietly, she had ruined that hope on her very first week, by proving to an entire classroom exactly why she would never truly be able to relax the way the rest of us could. I told her she had not ruined anything. I told her that catching a falling beam to save a classmate and defending herself against someone who had refused to stop even after being asked politely were not things she needed to apologize for. She looked at me then, and for the first time since I had met her, her carefully guarded expression cracked just slightly, revealing something raw underneath it. She said that where she came from, being strong did not make people trust you more. it often made them trust you less, because strength on Earth was so often tied to danger, and people had learned, through hard experience, to be cautious around anyone who displayed too much of it. She said she had been terrified that the same thing would happen here, that the moment this classroom saw what she was truly capable of, they would stop seeing her as a classmate and start seeing her only as a threat. I told her that was not what had happened, at least not entirely. I told her that most of the class had gone quiet, not out of fear, but out of surprise, and that surprise, given enough time, usually settled into something far more complicated and far more interesting than simple fear. She asked me what I meant. I told her about the conversations I had overheard walking back from the training field, students who had been afraid of her only hours earlier, now speaking in hushed, fascinated tones about how impressive the match had actually been, how quickly she had moved, how completely in control she had remained, even in the middle of what could have easily become a real conflict. I told her that Taz, of all people, had spent the entire walk back describing the moment in exaggerated, admiring detail to anyone who would listen. Lena managed a small, tired smile at that, the first real smile I had seen from her since the match had ended. We talked for a long while after that, longer than either of us probably intended. She told me more about her life on Earth, carefully, in pieces, the way someone shares something painful only when they trust the person listening will handle it gently. She told me about losing people she cared about to the dangers of her world, dangers that most species at this academy would never have to imagine, let alone survive. She told me that the hardest part of leaving Earth had not been the danger itself, but the guilt of finally being safe while people she loved remained behind in a place that could still take everything from them without warning. I did not have easy answers for any of that. I simply listened, the way I hoped someone would listen if our situations were ever reversed, and I told her, honestly, that I was glad she was here, difficult first week and all. Something shifted in the days that followed our conversation in the garden. Word of the sparring match had spread through the entire academy by the next morning, exaggerated in some places, understated in others, but the core truth remained the same for everyone who heard it. The quiet human girl was not someone to underestimate. Draven himself did not return to his usual behavior right away. For several days, he avoided Lena almost entirely, keeping his distance in a way that felt less like anger and more like genuine reflection. I noticed him watching her sometimes from across the room, his expression unreadable, clearly processing something about the encounter that went beyond simple embarrassment. Eventually, nearly a week later, he approached her during a free period, alone, without any of his usual friends nearby to witness whatever he was about to say. I happened to be close enough to overhear part of the conversation, though I made sure to give them the space to have it privately. Draven told her, in a voice far quieter and more sincere than I had ever heard him use, that he had been wrong about her. He admitted that he had pushed the sparring match further than he should have, driven by pride rather than genuine curiosity, and that he was grateful she had shown restraint even after he had clearly lost his own. He said that where he came from, strength like hers would have earned deep respect rather than suspicion, and he was sorry it had taken him this long to offer that same respect here. Lena accepted his apology quietly, without any lingering resentment in her voice. She told him she understood the instinct to test someone new, even if she wished it had not happened quite the way it did. The two of them did not become close friends after that. Not immediately, but the tension between them eased into something more like mutual understanding, and that alone felt like real progress. The classroom itself began to change as well, slowly, in small ways that were easy to miss, unless you were paying close attention. Students who had once whispered nervously whenever Lena walked by, began instead to greet her normally, the way they greeted anyone else. Elowin, the student whose life she had saved during the gravity malfunction, made a point of sitting beside her during lunch more than once, clearly grateful and increasingly curious about the girl who had once seemed so mysterious, and now simply seemed, more than anything, tired of carrying so much alone. I watched Lena begin to relax, just slightly, over the following days. Her shoulders sat a little looser during class, her eyes checked the exits a little less frequently, She still carried all the careful habits that Earth had taught her, the kind of habits that likely would never fully disappear, but there was a new lightness in her that had not been there during that first tense week. I asked her once, during a quiet afternoon in the courtyard, whether she felt any differently now that the whole academy knew the truth about what she was capable of. She thought about the question carefully before answering, the way she always did. She said that being seen, truly seen, had frightened her more than almost anything else since arriving here. But she said that being seen, and still accepted afterward, that was something entirely new to her, something Earth had rarely offered people like her, where strength was so often met with fear rather than understanding. She said she was beginning to believe, cautiously, that this place might actually become the safe world she had been hoping for all along. Neither of us knew yet just how soon, and how completely, that hope was about to be tested. 3 weeks after the sparring match, the Academy hosted its annual observation trip, a tradition older than any student currently enrolled. Every year, a group of senior classes traveled by transport shuttle to a research station orbiting a nearby gas giant, a peaceful, routine excursion meant to give students hands-on experience with real scientific instruments in a genuinely safe, heavily monitored environment. I had heard stories about the trip since my very first year at the Academy, always described the same way: beautiful views of swirling storms the size of entire moons, gentle zero-gravity exercises, a quiet, educational day trip with absolutely nothing dangerous about it at all. It was considered, by every measure the Academy used, one of the safest events on the entire yearly calendar. Lena had been nervous about the trip in the days leading up to it, though she tried not to show it. She admitted to me quietly the night before that she had never been aboard a spacecraft that small, never trusted a vessel with so few backup systems compared to the massive transports that had originally carried her away from Earth. I told her, honestly, that nothing had ever gone wrong on this trip before, not in all the years the Academy had been running it. I believed that completely when I said it. We boarded the shuttle early that morning, along with nearly 40 other students and 3 instructors, including Instructor Vale herself. The shuttle was sleek and comfortable, built more for observation than speed, with wide viewing windows along both sides that let sunlight from the distant star spill softly across the rows of seats. I sat beside Lena, near the middle of the shuttle, with Taz directly behind us, already chattering excitedly about the storms we were about to see. Draven sat a few rows ahead, occasionally glancing back toward us, the tension between him and Lena now replaced by something closer to quiet camaraderie. The first hour of the trip passed exactly as promised. The gas giant grew slowly larger in the windows, its storms swirling in beautiful shades of orange and deep red, and the students spent the time taking notes, running simple scans with handheld instruments, and enjoying the rare, genuine thrill of seeing something this vast up close. I noticed Lena relaxing more than I had ever seen her relax before, her attention fully absorbed by the view outside the window, the careful tension in her shoulders finally, truly easing for what might have been the first time since she arrived at the Academy. That peace lasted until the warning lights began flashing across the front of the cabin. The shuttle's systems announced, in a calm mechanical voice completely at odds with what was happening, that an unidentified vessel had entered close proximity and was requesting the shuttle alter its course immediately. Instructor Vale moved quickly to the front of the cabin, speaking urgently with the pilot, her earlier calm now replaced by open concern. I felt the shift in the room immediately, a wave of confused murmurs spreading through the students as everyone tried to understand what was happening. Most of us had never experienced an unexpected situation like this in our entire lives. Our training, our instincts, all of it was built for calm classrooms and predictable routines, not sudden uncertainty. Lena's posture changed instantly. I felt it beside me before I even fully registered the warning lights myself, her body going rigid and alert in a way that no longer looked relaxed at all. Whatever peace she had found in the last hour vanished completely, replaced by the same sharp, total focus I had seen during the sparring match weeks earlier. The unidentified vessel did not respond to the pilot's attempts at communication. Instead, it began closing distance rapidly, moving in a pattern that even I, with no combat training at all, could tell was not friendly. The shuttle's systems flashed a new warning, indicating the vessel had activated some kind of tractor beam, an old but effective technology used by opportunistic raiders who targeted slower, unarmed transports traveling through less protected regions of space. Panic began spreading through the cabin almost immediately. Several students screamed. Others froze completely in their seats, exactly the way our species always froze when danger arrived too suddenly for our instincts to process. Taz grabbed the back of my seat so hard I heard the frame creak under his grip. Instructor Vale tried her best to keep order, her voice raised over the growing noise, instructing everyone to remain in their seats and stay calm while she coordinated with the pilot. But even her voice carried an edge of fear that none of us had ever heard from her before, and that fear only made the panic in the cabin worse. Lena stood up. She moved calmly through the chaos, weaving past frozen and panicking students toward the front of the shuttle, her voice cutting through the noise with a steadiness that immediately drew attention. She did not shout. She simply spoke clearly, firmly, the way someone speaks when they have handled emergencies before and know exactly how important a calm voice can be in a moment like this. She told the students nearest her to stay low and hold on to something secure. She told Taz directly to help Elowen fasten her restraints properly, giving him a specific task that pulled him out of his own panic simply by giving him something useful to focus on. Within seconds, the tone of the cabin had shifted, not because the danger had lessened, but because someone in the room finally sounded like they knew what they were doing. She reached the front of the cabin and spoke quietly with Instructor Vale and the pilot. I could not hear everything that was said, but I caught pieces, enough to understand that the raiding vessel likely intended to disable the shuttle's systems and board it, a tactic Lena seemed to recognize immediately, though I did not understand how, not yet. The tractor beam locked fully onto the shuttle. Moments later, the entire vessel shuddering as its own engines strained uselessly against the pull. The lights flickered, then steadied, and the pilot announced grimly that main power had been partially compromised, though life support remained stable for now. Instructor Vale, doing her best to maintain order, told everyone that the Academy's emergency systems had already sent an automatic distress signal and that help would likely arrive within the hour. She urged everyone to remain calm and simply wait. Lena did not look like someone willing to simply wait. She asked the pilot, quietly but urgently, how long the shuttle's systems could hold if the raiding vessel forced its way aboard before help arrived. The pilot's hesitant answer made it clear that an hour might be far too long, that whoever was on that approaching vessel could reach the shuttle's boarding hatch in a fraction of that time. I watched something settle over Lena's expression in that moment, a decision forming behind her eyes, quiet and absolute. She turned to Instructor Vale and told her, calmly but firmly, that she needed access to the emergency supply locker near the rear of the shuttle, the one containing basic tools meant for minor repairs and maintenance work. Instructor Vale hesitated only a moment before agreeing, perhaps recognizing, the same way I was beginning to recognize, that whatever Lena intended to do, she seemed to genuinely know what she was doing far better than the rest of us did. Lena moved to the rear of the shuttle, and I followed without fully deciding to, some part of me unwilling to simply sit still while she faced whatever was coming completely alone. She opened the supply locker and began quickly assessing the tools inside, selecting a few items with the kind of fast, practical judgment that came from someone who had clearly improvised solutions to serious problems before, using whatever happened to be available. I asked her, my voice not nearly as steady as hers, what she was planning to do. She told me, without stopping her work, that the boarding hatch was the weakest point of entry, and that if she could reinforce it and buy enough time, the automatic distress signal would bring real help before anyone dangerous made it aboard. She said this the way someone describes an ordinary task, calm and practical, though the stakes could not have been higher. I asked if she was afraid. She paused, just for a moment, and told me the truth. She said yes, of course she was afraid, but that fear had never once stopped her from doing what needed to be done, not on Earth, and not here either. She said the difference now was that, for the first time in her life, she was not the only person on Earth's side of a dangerous situation. She had people around her who trusted her, and that trust, strangely, made the fear easier to carry. She worked quickly at the boarding hatch, securing it with tools never designed for that exact purpose, using knowledge she must have built over years of facing emergencies with far less support than she had now. I stayed close, handing her tools when she asked, doing what little I could to help, my own fear slowly settling into something more useful under the steadiness of her example. The raiding vessel's boarding attempt came sooner than any of us hoped. A heavy mechanical clang echoed through the rear section of the shuttle as something attached itself to the outer hull, followed by the low grinding sound of an attempt to force the hatch open. Lena positioned herself directly in front of the reinforced hatch, calm and ready, her earlier fear now folded neatly beneath the same total focus I had seen during the sparring match. She told me, quietly but firmly, to get back toward the main cabin and stay with the others. I did not want to leave her there alone, but I understood, in that moment, that arguing would only slow her down, and slowing her down was the one thing none of us could afford right now. I moved back toward the main cabin, where the other students waited in tense, frightened silence, watching the rear section of the shuttle, as if staring hard enough might somehow protect the girl standing guard there alone. The grinding at the hatch continued for several long, agonizing minutes, the reinforced barrier holding far longer than the pilot had believed possible, buying precious time that none of us had expected to have. Then, just as the metal finally began to give way, a new sound reached the cabin, a deep, familiar hum growing steadily louder outside the shuttle's hull. Instructor Vale, checking the front display with visible relief flooding her face, announced that Academy security vessels had arrived, responding to the distress signal far faster than any of us had dared to hope. The raiding vessel's tractor beam released almost immediately, the ship itself breaking away and fleeing at speed as the security vessels closed in, clearly unwilling to risk a confrontation with proper reinforcements now on the scene. The cabin erupted into a mixture of relieved cries and exhausted, disbelieving laughter, students embracing each other, instructors moving quickly to check that everyone remained unharmed. I hurried toward the rear of the shuttle, where Lena still stood at the hatch, breathing hard, her hands slightly unsteady now that the immediate danger had finally passed. She looked at me, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something in her expression that looked almost like disbelief, as if she genuinely had not expected things to end this well. I asked her if she was all right. She nodded slowly, then admitted, quietly, that this was the first time in her life a dangerous situation had ended with everyone completely safe, no losses, no lasting damage, simply a frightening event that passed and left everyone standing. I did not fully understand, not then, just how significant that was to her, though I would come to understand it more fully in the days that followed. When the shuttle finally returned safely to the Academy grounds, the entire school seemed to already know what had happened, word spreading faster than any of us could have anticipated. Students who had once whispered nervously about the strange girl from the dangerous planet now spoke openly, admiringly, about how she had kept the entire shuttle calm, how she had reinforced the hatch with nothing but ordinary tools and quick thinking, how her steady presence in the middle of genuine danger had likely saved every single person aboard. Draven found her later that evening, near the same garden wall where I had once sat with her after the sparring match. I watched from a distance as he spoke with her, his posture respectful in a way I had never seen from him before. Whatever he said seemed to leave her smiling, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes completely. Instructor Vale addressed the whole class the following morning, her voice warm with a sincerity that felt entirely different from her usual composed instructions. She said that the Academy had always prided itself on being a place of safety and learning, but that true safety, she had come to understand, was not simply the absence of danger. It was having someone among you capable of facing danger calmly, competently, and selflessly when it truly mattered. She looked directly at Lena as she said this, and for once, Lena did not look away or try to shrink into her seat. She simply nodded, quietly accepting words she had clearly needed to hear for a very long time. I sat beside her that morning, watching the rest of the classroom, students who had once feared her, now looking at her with open respect and genuine gratitude. Elowen, whose life had been saved twice now by the same steady hands, gave her a small, warm smile from across the room. I thought back to that very first day, when Instructor Vale had led a quiet, unassuming girl through the classroom door, and none of us had understood what we were truly looking at. We had expected someone ordinary. We had expected softness, or perhaps hidden weakness disguised as quiet manners. Instead, this classroom, safe and sheltered for its entire existence, had welcomed someone who understood danger more deeply than any of us ever had, someone who had spent her whole life learning exactly how to protect the people around her, and who had carried that knowledge quietly across the galaxy, waiting patiently for a place that finally deserved to be protected in return. The galaxy, I realized, had spent generations fearing worlds like Earth, labeling them extreme, dangerous, unfit for polite company. But sitting beside Lena that morning, watching her finally begin to relax into a life she had earned through more courage than any of us could truly measure, I understood something the rest of the galaxy had gotten completely wrong. Earth had not sent us a warning. Earth had sent us exactly the kind of person you would want standing beside you, quietly and without complaint, the moment everything else in the universe finally